Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Black-Eyed Kids horror stories. First story, Black-Eyed Kids. I've been asked by a couple of members to post my own Black-Eyed Kids experience. It was a cold October evening, not too far off from Halloween. I remember sitting in my room, playing the original Suikoden. The evening was slowly creeping by, so I decided to go to the corner store. It was only 3 blocks. Shouldn't be much trouble, right? During my walk, I see the normal. The occasional person putting up Halloween decorations and kids playing in their yards. But this story is about something far more sinister. I remember seeing 2 teens about age 14 knocking on a door asking to use the phone, which of course I thought was weird because most teens these days have phones. As I kept walking, they stopped and stared at me for a short moment. I felt the blood in veins chill. I felt so creeped out I hurried to the next block. The next block seemed fine until I looked behind me and saw the 2 teens were following me. I took off sprinting to the store at this point. I saw the sign for the store and relief washed over me. I opened the door and I told the cashier about what happened on the way here. He looked at me slightly creeped out and told me a story about this happening to him in his hometown and how they found him the day he left and asked for his help in an emotionless voice, and he told me to never agree to help. He told me another story, but at that point I was no longer paying attention because they were standing at the door asking to be let in. The cashier freaked out and locked the door. The teens never seemed to waver or leave. They wouldn't step away from the door. It had been an hour. The cashier and I were ready to fight our way out, but instead he took me out the back. The one teen came around the back just as the door shut behind us. "Can you help me?" is all he could say. He was closing in on us, and his eyes, they were black as a starless night. They were peering right into my soul. I couldn't help but gaze into his eyes. The terror. I can't remember too much of what happened next, but I do recall the sounds of struggle. When I came to, the cashier was struggling with both teens. He was calling out to me for help. I ran towards them, grabbed him by his collar, and pulled him between the 2, and knocking them over in the process. I didn't look back until I was near my house. The cashier was gone, but the teens were still following behind. I ran into my house, closed all the blinds, and turned the music up. I got lucky that day, but I'm not sure how long I can keep out of their grasp. I tried to find and thank the cashier for saving my life that day, but he didn't show up to work after that. I asked his booze, and he told me he called over the phone and quit. He said he was moving. To this very day, I sometimes feel the fear of those eyes watching me as I drive to work. I sometimes will look out my window and swear I see them watching my house from a couple blocks away, waiting for their next chance. Second story, encounter with a black-eyed kid. I recently read a story about the Black-Eyed Kids. This story felt like a twisted tale of déjà vu. I believe I've encountered a BK. I've never mentioned this particular detail about the eyes to anyone, for fear they would think I was fabricating the story or going crazy. The incident took place about 13 years ago. I had just moved to a new city with my wife. We were small-town newlyweds from the Midwest. We moved cross-country to one of the biggest cities in the Southwest so I could attend graduate school. Being naive and new to city living, I habitually answered the door without a second thought. Never again after this. The first thing that should have tipped me off to the peculiarity of this situation was the fact that someone was knocking at 6 o'clock in the morning. The second thing that should have dawned on me is this kid had to reach over a rather tall patio gate to unlatch and open it. The knock at the door was startling. My wife and I were getting ready for work, a pretty normal routine. The moment I opened the door, I was overtaken with an inexplicable sense of fear. To this day, I can picture him. Teenager, average height, average build, knee-length black leather coat, short black hair, and sunglasses. The sunglasses at 6 a.m. struck me as odd, and even more odd, he was eating an apple. He was very polite and asked if he could come in and warm up. I said, no, closed the door, and slid the security chain in place. A moment later, another knock. I opened the now chained door, and before I could speak, he asked again if he could come in and warm up. No, I reply and attempted to close the door. Before the door could shut, he put his hand out, stopping the door on its hinges. He looked directly into my eyes, still wearing his sunglasses, and said, "Can I at least get some ketchup for my apple?" I reply, albeit a little confused, "Get the hell out of here. My wife is calling the police." He takes a moment to let this information sink in, lowers his glasses, revealing eyes as black as obsidian, and says, "No, you won't be calling anybody." At that moment, I force the door closed, lock it, and call out to my wife. She is scared shitless, hiding in the bedroom. All jacked up on adrenaline, I rip the curtains back to look out the window next to the door. He's gone. Absolutely no trace of him. I go out on the patio and check the gate. It's still latched from the inside. That was messed up, I think to myself, and as I turn to enter the house, I notice a half-eaten apple lying on the ground. Third story. If this ever happens, don't answer the door, hide, lock everything, and never look into their eyes. I know that this sounds like the kind of advice to anyone left alone in the house at night, but this is different. It started a week ago. I was in bed. It had just turned 1 o'clock. I was scrolling on my phone while my wife, Steph, was asleep. I suddenly had a notification pop up at the top of my phone. Anyone with a video doorbell will be accustomed to this. Motion detected. I normally ignore it as it was either a car coming down the road or a person stumbling back home after a night out. Then the doorbell chimed. The notification followed, "There's a person at your front door." I opened the app. There sure enough was a young woman standing, clinging onto my doorframe. I answered, "Hello, can I help you?" She came back immediately, "Please let me in. Someone is chasing me." I told her to stay where she was and I would call the police. I heard her again, "Please let me in. He's going to hurt me. Please hurry." At this point, my wife woke up. She asked me what I was doing. As I put some clothes on ready to go downstairs, I said there was a woman at our door begging to come in as someone was chasing her. I was about to dial for the police when Steph opened the app. She said, "Babe, no one is there." We looked back on the motion history. Both notifications were logged. I opened the first one, nothing but our front porch. I proceeded to the other notification where someone had pressed the doorbell. There was my front porch, shrouded in darkness, but this time we could hear only my voice. Of course, there was no response to my questions. I thought to myself, was I going crazy? My wife said it was late. I must have been half asleep and my mind was playing tricks on me. Even if that was right, it still didn't explain why we got the notifications. The next night, we both sat binging a Netflix show in our living room. We must have lost track of time as it was nearly 1 in the morning. I want to check the back door was locked when my phone buzzed. I asked Steph whether she had the same. She had. I opened the app just as it notified me that someone had pressed the bell. We both quickly opened the live view, stood at our door, a child. The young boy must have been no older than 8. The camera was in night vision, which was black and white. The boy's face glowed, eyes piercing through my screen. I once again answered, "Hello, can I help?" The kid looked up at the camera. "Hi, my daddy broke down just up the road and his phone is dead. Can you please let me in? I need to use your phone." Me and Steph looked at each other. She shook her head at me. I replied to him, "I can call someone out for you, or maybe the police can help." The boy then seemed to turn. His voice now had anger to it. "Open the door. I need help. Are you really going to let me stay out here all alone?" His story had changed. I went back after swallowing my own fear. "Stay there, I will get help." This time I called the police. They came around 20 minutes later. By this point, no one was around. We had seen the boy walk off around the corner 5 minutes after I got off the phone. The officers checked our road and the surrounding area. They found no people, not even the odd car driving around. We both tried to show them the app, but obviously there was nothing there. The 2 officers were understanding and seemed to believe us. They gave us the department's direct number and told us to call them if anything happens again. We went to bed that night scared and confused. We didn't understand what or why this was happening to us. The next day, we decided to get an early night. We made sure everything was locked and the house secure. We both fell asleep early. I was woken up at just gone 1 o'clock to the sound of 2 sets of buzzing from my phone. I ignored these. I just rolled over and went back to sleep. When I looked at my phone in the morning, I opened up the doorbell app. The video playback showed nothing, but I could hear scratching for about 2 to 3 seconds after the apparent press of the bell. I went downstairs and checked the door. 3 sets of 4 deep scratches went down my front door. The anxiety hit me like a tidal wave going throughout my body. I now feared the night ahead of us. 2 nights ago, we both had decided to stay up. We were going to put an end to this. We were on edge in our own home, and it just wasn't right. The minutes drew closer to that damn time 1 o'clock. Then, right on schedule, the notification started. I opened the app. Now stood there one of the policemen. He was one of the officers that was with us the other night. I thought it was strange. It caught me off guard. Steph said that she will look out the window upstairs. We had both said earlier that one of us would look out the window to confirm if someone really was there. I answered the door. "Hello, officer. Can I help you?" He looked into the camera. "We have an update on the problem you have been having. Can you please open the door?" I felt a sense of conflict come over me. This didn't feel right. I had watched enough police programs and dramas to know they usually have to report to places with another officer. The lack of any police cars also unnerved me. "Sorry, officer. I'm sure you can understand the reluctancy to open the door due to our situation." He snapped back. "It's fine. I'm an officer of the law and instructing you to please open up. I need to come in and update you." Now I knew something was wrong. His whole demeanor was now completely different to when we spoke 2 nights ago. I watched as his head looked upwards. I heard my wife scream the words, "Oh my God," his eyes. "What?" I rushed up the stairs, my feet slipping as I ran. I saw Steph, but she looked petrified. She stared at me blankly and said, "You need to let him in. He will help us." I uttered back, struggling to catch my breath. "We can't. You know we can't." "What did you see? What was wrong with his eyes?" She tilted her head at me. Her eyes began to roll upwards. "Let him in. Let him in." Her tone started to change. It was turning into a gravelly, rasping voice. Her face now full of anger as she screamed at me, "Let him in now." I grabbed her and shook her while shouting, "Steph, listen to me. Snap out of it." She looked back at me dazed and confused. She said wearily, with tears in her eyes, "I want to go to bed." I said, "Only if you are okay." She said she was fine and didn't know what happened. I checked the video feed once more. No one was there. It took me a few hours to fall asleep worrying about what happened to Steph. When I woke the next morning, Steph was gone. Her phone and jewelry left on the bedside cabinet. I went downstairs and searched for her, but nothing. She wasn't in the house. I called the police department on the number I was given. I spoke to the partner of the policeman that was at my door. I told him everything that happened and that my wife had gone missing. They told me the officer that was stood at my door 8 hours earlier was on leave. He flew out on holiday yesterday morning. It couldn't have been him. In the hours ahead, a search team was assembled, and I joined them in searching the local area. There was no sign of her. It's now 11 p.m. I'm sitting alone in my living room, my head now full of fear and radiating pain. I just want my Steph home. I just want her malady back. Here it comes, 0:59. 3, 2, 1 o'clock. The notifications came through. I opened the app. Steph was at the front door. I was almost half expecting it. I said, "Where were you, honey?" She looked into the camera. "I was taken, but I escaped, and I'm here now. Let me in, and I will tell you all about it." I took a deep sigh. "Okay, I will be there in a minute, babe. What can I do? She is my wife. I have nothing without her." I wrote all of this throughout this evening, hoping for some sort of closure, maybe even a happy ending to this horrible experience. I guess now it will just be a piece of evidence on what happened to us both. I need to go answer the door now. My wife is home. 4th story. Black-eyed children followed me home. I was walking to my car as quickly as I could. I checked my watch. It was 7:15 p.m. I shook my head. My phone rang. The screen showed that it was my wife calling, right on time. "You better be close to the restaurant," she said. The tone in her voice left me wondering if she knew that I was just leaving the office. I stayed silent. "Damn it, Jack." She cursed quietly. "I'm already here. I'm sorry." I didn't realize how much work I would have to get done today. And we're still not on pace to make our deadline. The whole team is working late. Not just me. And I can't be the only person leaving on time when my subordinates are staying late. I pleaded, "How long until you get here?" She asked angrily. "If I run every red light, I can be there in 30 minutes, I told her. She didn't answer for a long while. I got into my car, and just as I started to wonder if she had hung up on me, my car picked up the Bluetooth. "Okay, just hurry. It's bad enough the waiter has asked me twice if I was waiting for someone." She instructed, "I'm sorry, babe. I'll be there as soon as I can." I said. I shifted my car into reverse and started to back up. A loud bang on my window made me slam on the brakes. I threw it into the park and turned around to see if I hit something or worse, someone. I didn't see anything. I turned back around in my seat to find two children standing next to my door. I jumped at the shock. They both just stood there. Judging by their size, I would guess they were about 9 or 10. I had this terrible feeling in my stomach that there was something wrong. But they were children, probably lost. I told myself. I cracked the window just enough to ask if I could help them. "Can I use your phone?" One of the kids asked. The child's tone had a tinge of darkness to it. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. But I reached for my phone and unlocked it. When I looked back up at the child, I noticed they had both moved closer. They both stared down at their feet. Their hoods up over their head cast shadows over their faces. It almost appeared they didn't have any faces at all. At that point, I had this unyielding sense of fear building that I couldn't justify. "Is there someone you'd like me to call for you?" I asked. Then one of the kids raised his head slightly. The shadows that covered his face parted as the new angle of his hood allowed me to see his face. But his eyes were still hidden in the shadows. They appeared to be pitch black. Not that they were missing, but he had no iris, no whites in his eyes at all. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and the boy seemed to notice my fear. He lowered his head again. "We need to use your phone," he pleaded. I recovered and scolded myself quietly for allowing a trick of the light to scare me so badly. "Who can I call for you?" "Just give me their number," I said, my hand ready to dial. Maybe it was the fact that the kids wouldn't look at me. Maybe it was the fact that the kids were out of place in the business district after sundown. But something inside me was screaming not to give them my phone. "If you can't give me the number, I'm sure you can go inside the lobby and ask the security guard to let you call your parents," I said and pointed toward the lobby door. Neither one of them turned to look. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I put my car in reverse. I was eager to get the hell out of there. I was eager to get away from these children. I looked in the rearview mirror to make sure I was clear. A loud bang stopped me in my tracks. For a split second, I thought I hit someone, and then I heard it again. Both of the boys were slapping their hands, palm down on my driver's side window. A third time, a fourth time. In unison, they slapped my window. "Can we just get in your car? We need a ride," they asked in a monotone and utterly unsettling tone. I slammed the gas down and backed up without even looking, and then I slammed into drive and peeled out. I was a good 10 minutes down the road before my heart stopped trying to beat out of my chest. I was so worked up that I almost missed my exit. I wanted to get home so bad I had forgotten about date night. I met my wife at her favorite restaurant and we ate. She was initially angry about me being late. We hadn't had much time alone since we had our son. He was 4 now, and this was probably our 5th date night in that 4 years. Her mood switched from being angry to laughing at me as I explained why I was so late. I told her everything about the kids. "So you were scared of a couple of kids? They could still be out there looking for their parents." She heckled me. She knew how scared I was. There was something wrong with them, but she didn't believe it. At least not at that point. Our son was staying at the babysitter's house all night, so we had the house to ourselves. It was 3 in the morning when we heard the knock at the door. I woke up first and just sat in bed and listened. There was a faint, steady knock at the door. In threes. Knock, knock, knock. And then a pause followed by another set of 3. Knock, knock, knock. Then my wife woke up. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "Yeah, there is someone at the front door," I replied. My heart sped up. I knew before I did that it was them. My wife sat up and grabbed her phone. It's after 3 in the morning. Who could it be? She asked, and they didn't hit the doorbell. She added. She opened the doorbell app on her phone to reveal an empty porch. There was nobody there. She showed me. The knocking continued, and then I saw them. There was a faint silhouette in the darkness. Zoom in there, I said and pointed to the corner of the steps. She did, and we could see them. The two boys were standing in the shadows. One of them kicked the steps. Knock, knock, knock. My wife looked at me. There's no way those kids followed you home. This has to be a joke, she said. She stood up and put on her robe. I did too. We both made our way downstairs. We argued as we walked. She wanted to open the door. I didn't. Knock, knock, knock. We can't open the door, I told her. They're just kids playing a prank. She replied, knock, knock, knock. Finally, we reached the door and my wife undid the locks and swung it open. We both took a step back as soon as we did. The kids were no longer standing in the shadow, but had moved up to the first step. The only light was from behind us, flowing out of the house. It was enough for us to see the two small figures staring at us, but not enough to see any detail. What do you want? My wife asked. I was flipping the light switch on and off for the porch light. It wouldn't come on, but I knew it had been on when we got home. Can we come inside? The kids asked in unison. I could see that my wife had gone pale. She finally believed me. Something wasn't right. The kids both took a step to the next step. Can we call the police for you? Are you lost? She asked them. They stepped up to the porch, and then they were close enough. Just 3 feet away, their faces were fully illuminated. The light revealed the same thing I thought I had seen earlier. Wide eyes, black as coal. They began to smile at us. We need to come inside. We need help, they said in unison as if they shared the same thoughts. I moved my wife out of the way and slammed the door. My hands fumbled for the locks as I looked through the peephole. I'm calling the cops, I yelled through the door. My wife still had her phone in her hand. She started to dial 911. Wait, I said. They're leaving, I told her. The kids walked back into the street and disappeared into the night. The next day we slept in and then picked up our son. It was a pretty uneventful day, at least until 3 a.m. I woke to the sound of knocking. I sat up, half asleep. I heard my wife tell me it was just our son. I'll get it, she told me. I went back to sleep. That was about 10 minutes ago. I noticed she didn't come back to bed, and I decided to check the security cameras on my phone. My wife is lying on the floor dead. There is blood everywhere. Standing at her feet are the two boys, and next to them is my son. His eyes were black as coal. As I'm writing this, I can hear them walking down the hall toward me. For the love of God, if you see black-eyed children, do not talk to them. Do not give them anything, and please do not let them into your house. Fifth story, Black-Eyed Kids. I'm a Marine stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I live in the infantry barracks off of River Road. I recently had a rather strange encounter with a pair of black-eyed kids. I live on the 3rd floor of the barracks that have open walkways on the outside and the rooms on the inside. This happened on a weekend back in November 2009. It was a weekend, so almost every Marine was out, either home, drinking, or sleeping. Only a handful were left in the barracks awake. I'd stayed in that weekend because I was broke and had no money to go out. I was watching a movie when I heard a knock at my door. Figuring it was my roommate who'd lost his key again, I went and opened it. Instead of drunken roommate, I found 2 little kids standing on the walkway. Only these kids freaked the hell out of me. I don't know what it was about them, but as a Marine, we're always told to listen to that little voice in your head because it just might save your life from an IED, improvised explosive device. Right then, that voice was screaming at me to shut the door and lock it. The plea. There's also the fact that these kids had absolutely pitch black eyes. I mean, no white or any other color to them whatsoever, just black. But I pushed those things aside and asked them what they were doing there so late. They responded by saying that it was really cold out and they wanted to come in and read. I was confused as hell because I've never met a kid that wants to read. Also, there was no mention of any parents or anything else you'd expect a lost couple of kids to say. I couldn't take my eyes of their pitch black eyes. It was like they were sucking me in. I felt horrible and was suddenly frightened for my life, like I needed to immediately take cover. They just stared at me with those goddamn eyes. I took a quick look up and down the walkway to see if any other Marines were out, but there was nobody in sight. I turned back to the kids who I noticed had taken a step forward toward me. I got the feeling like I was being hunted, like these kids were predators and out for their next meal or something. Instinct gave way to reason, and I decided to listen to that voice and shut the door and locked it. I heard soft, constant knocking for the next 5 minutes before I heard my window rattle, and then nothing. I went down to the officer on duty the next morning and asked him about it, and he said he hadn't heard of or seen any kids in the area at all, and dismissed it, saying that I'd probably had too much to drink last night. Only I hadn't been drinking at all or anything like that night. I don't know what or who those kids were, but I doubt any of the families here would let their kids wander around at night on a military base. Sixth story. The Black-Eyed Kids came. Before you read this, I have to tell you how I feel about these stories. I haven't believed in the paranormal since high school. I'd never even heard of Black-Eyed Kids until read it. These stories were always just entertainment for me, and I took them as fiction even though they are all true. I found myself stuck on the BEK stories because they seemed the most unusual to me, and I enjoyed a fresh change of pace over the regular ghost story. I feel very guilty for what I'm about to tell you all because I fear that reading these stories is why it happened to me. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. It's only my knowledge from reading BK stories on Reddit that I feel saved my life last night. There is no history of mental illness in my family, and I have never been drunk or taken a mind-altering substance. The strongest I've ever had is ibuprofen. I feel that many of you will discount my story if I don't make you aware of this. Also, I want to add that I will not be answering your questions or even rereading what I'm writing right now. This is a throwaway account, and I must use it to warn you of the BKs, and I will never speak of this again, although I fear I may be driven to madness through my paranoia even as I write this story in my brother's house with the lights on while he plays COD. I am terrified. Last night was like any other night. I was switching between listening to music and watching YouTube videos with one headphone in so I can hear my infant daughter if she cries. That way my wife can get a full night's sleep. She works at 4 a.m. at the hospital every day. Well, I decided to go lay down in the spare bed in the baby's room. Just as I dozed off, I heard a thumping coming from the front porch. Startled at first, I opened my eyes wide and scanned the room. Realizing it was most likely my cat scratching himself on the front porch, I dozed back off. Then again, the thumping. Damn cat. I got out of bed to run him off the porch, only to see he wasn't there anymore. Now that I was up again, I wasn't the least bit tired. I figure I'll just get some tea and check Facebook while I'm up. Maybe finish the web series I was watching on YouTube. A few minutes into the video, I felt the sudden urge to look up at the kitchen window. There they were. The tops of two short-statured people's heads cresting the stairs just above my window frame. The people were just short enough to not see in the window, but I could see out. I heard no footsteps on my porch as my stomach turned. But the knock was a steady hollow thump. The very same thump I had just blamed on my cat. Deciding it was best not to answer, I shut my laptop and crept by the door back to the baby's room. I assumed it was some of the people from the low-income housing across the road from me that were high or hiding from the cops, or maybe looking for my cousin who stays with me often and has many friends over there. The last thing I needed was to try to explain to two stoners that I was trying to sleep even though it was 2 a.m. It wasn't until I got to my daughter's room that the creepiness set in. The thump had moved from the kitchen to the bedroom windows. Both windows, a room apart, thumping in perfect time. These stoners were going to wake up my daughter if I didn't run them off now. Pissed off, I went out to the kitchen, unlocked, and opened the door ready to run around to the side of the house and kick some little idiot's ass. It happened then. Standing there looking up at me were two 10 or 11-year-old boys. The feeling of dread and the smell of mold almost made me vomit. The smaller of the two then spoke. "May we use your telegraph?" Huh. I just stared blankly at these boys, horrified at what I then realized. Their eyes were pitch black. He asked again to use my telegraph. There wasn't a sound to be heard, no crickets chirping, No dogs barking, no cars driving by. Nothing. I try to play it cool and ignore the fact that he didn't say telephone or phone or cell. Anything that would have made any sense of the situation, and calmly replied, "I don't have service at my house, sorry." The expressions on their faces turned to rage as I finished my sentence. Swiftly, I shut the door and locked it as quickly as I could, then stumbled back to protect my daughter. I picked her up from her crib and held her close. The fact that she didn't wake up freaked me out the most, but I managed to gather my senses enough to make sure she was still breathing and warm. Everything seemed okay with her. The thumping on the windows was back. I dropped to the floor as close to the wall as I could and held my little girl in my arms and wept like a child. I felt helpless and afraid. I lied there for what felt like hours and hours, crying and shaking until I heard it, my wife's alarm clock. The thumping stopped the instant the alarm went off, and I crept into the master bedroom with the baby. "What's wrong with you?" my wife asked. "I just had a bad dream," is all I could mutter out. "Okay, well, give me the baby so I can feed her before work." I handed my wife the baby, and she fed her like any normal day. I turned on every light in the house and made coffee for her. For some reason, just having her awake calmed my nerves enough to pretend like nothing happened. I walked her out to the car, nervously with the baby in my arms. I asked her not to leave until I walked back in the house. She was put off by the request, but did so to humor me. Once I was safely in the house, I locked the door again. And in the house, I sat horrified until she got home. I insisted we go to the next town over and stay the weekend at my brother's house. And here I sit horrified while she sleeps in the guest room with my daughter, wondering why they stopped when the alarm went off. I think I know the answer. I was aware of BKs, she wasn't. Every story I've read about them is from someone who already knew about them. Maybe, just maybe, knowledge of them existing is the only reason they visit. Seventh story. I think I'm at the Black Eyed Kids. Cops just left. I'm freaking out. Okay, so, hey, no sleep. I'm not a writer. I just love reading all these stories on here. They're all so creepy. I never thought I'd have to post something for help. Let me tell you a little about myself. I'm in my early 20s. I just moved into this apartment, and I tend to live a very private life. I don't even have a Facebook account. I work during the day at a grocery store. Okay, so I'm walking up my flight of steps to get to my apartment, and I hear these kids laughing, and then I heard whispering. It was kind of late, so I thought this was weird, but I ignored it and walked in my apartment. I live on the 3rd floor. I was getting ready to open my balcony door. It was really muggy in my apartment. I walk over to the door and pull my blinds, and 2 kids are staring back at me. Sorry for the F-bomb, but I'm still shaking. I screamed and backed away, smashing my leg into the end table. They were both in blue jeans, and the oldest, he was taller, had on a green shirt with white stripes, and the younger had on a button-up light blue shirt. The oldest one touched the sliding door. "Hey, miss, can you let us in?" The younger one just kept looking around. I still just stared at them. I finally was able to say, "How'd you get on my balcony?" I walked to the door and noticed how excited the older one got. He moved closer to the entrance. "Can you let us in?" I wasn't thinking. I unlocked the door, and when I looked up, their eyes were black. The entire eye. I quick locked the door and told them I had to call the police because my door was jammed and I couldn't unlock the door. So I called the police. The oldest boy pleaded with me the entire time to let them in. The police arrived about an hour ago. They came in and walked to the balcony. When they opened my balcony door, nothing was there. They looked down and saw 2 children that were running in the parking lot away from the building. The police took a report and said they had to have had help getting up there and that they would question the neighbors. I'm freaking out. I'm crying. I don't want to stay here. But then again, I don't feel safe going outside right now. I put salt by my door and windows, but I've never seen eyes black like that, not even in movies. I'm terrified. 8th story. The kids at my doors say they're from my future. They have no eyes. I woke up last night to knocking. 3 soft taps. Now on the front door. On the bedroom window. I live alone. 1-story house. The backyard backs into woods. No fence. There's a porch light, but it was off. The knocking came again, measured, too slow to be urgent. I stood there for a minute, heart thumping, before I pulled the curtain aside. Two kids were standing there. They couldn't have been older than 10. Pale skin, dark clothes. One boy, one girl. Their heads were tilted just slightly, like they were studying me through the glass. Their eyes were completely black. No whites, no color, just endless, lightless pits. I stepped back, almost tripped over the bed. They didn't move. Then, together, they lifted their hands and pointed toward the lock on the window. That's when I noticed something else. They were mouthing words, over and over, but not in sync. The boy was saying, "Let us in." The girl was saying, "You asked us to come." I backed out of the room and locked myself in the bathroom. I must have stayed there for over an hour just listening. No knocks, no footsteps, only whispering, low, impossible to place, like it was coming through the walls. At some point, I must have passed out. By morning, they were gone, but there were wet footprints on the floor outside the bathroom. They were inside at some point. That was 2 nights ago. Last night, they came back. Only this time, they weren't outside. They were sitting in my kitchen, waiting. The girl was drawing something on the table with her finger. The boy was looking straight at me. He smiled. "Now that we've come," he said, "we can show you." "Show me what?" I asked before I could stop myself. His smile widened. "How it ends." I didn't answer them. I didn't ask questions. I just turned and ran. Straight out of the kitchen, through the hallway, into the front room. I grabbed my keys, flung open the door, and stopped cold. The hallway was in front of me again. Not the porch, not the night, just the same goddamn hallway I just run through. I backed up, slammed the door shut, turned around. The kids were still sitting at the kitchen table. Exactly the same. Same smiles. Same stillness. Like they hadn't noticed I'd left at all. I didn't speak. I just tried again. Back down the hallway. Turned the corner. Bathroom this time. I threw open the door. The hallway. Again. Same floorboards. Same wall clock, ticking too slow. Same smell of damp wood and something rotting just out of reach. I tried every door. The bedroom. The garage. Even the coat closet. They all led back to the hallway. I don't know how long I did it. I stopped counting after 13. Eventually, I opened the front door again and found them standing on the porch. Not sitting. Not waiting. Watching. "We're showing you," the girl said softly. Her voice didn't echo right. It felt like it hit the inside of my skull instead of the air. "Showing me what?" I choked. The boy raised his hand and pointed behind me. "Your end." I turned around slowly. It was the hallway. But this time it was filled with doors. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Too many to count. All pulsing slightly like lungs made of wood. Each door had something carved into it. Dates. Names. Symbols. Mine was at the center. Scratched deep into blackened oak. June 14th. You let them in. The doors all creaked open at once. And behind every one of them was me. Versions of me. Some screaming. Some still. Some hanging. Some whispering something I couldn't hear. One of them, pale, skin peeling like old wallpaper, looked right at me and said, "You shouldn't have opened the window." I ran. I don't even remember which direction. Just forward. Through one door. Then another. But I'm still here. Every door leads to another version of this house. Every mirror shows someone else's face wearing mine. Every clock ticks down, and I don't know what happens when it reaches 0. I don't think I'm in my house anymore. I think I'm in theirs. And the worst part is, someone else is living in mine. 9th story. If you ever see black-eyed children, please don't make the same mistake that I did. In October of last year, I saw the black-eyed children for the first time. They floated just outside the open window, their skin a pale white, and their eyes as dark and void as the deepest hole you can imagine. I become lost in those eyes. Have you ever had a nightmare you can't remember? I awoke abruptly, covered in sweat, and my heart beating faster than it ever had before. Yet I couldn't recall the goings-on of my mind that had shaken me so thoroughly. Sitting up at the edge of my bed, I stared over at my 8-year-old son. "Ben, monsters aren't real. There's nothing to be afraid of," I had said, night after night with little result. But that wasn't true, was it? There was plenty to be afraid of. Since his mother had died, Each night had progressed the same. I would tuck him in, Ben would promise that he would stay in his own room tonight, and I would kiss him on the forehead. I would then walk tiredly to my own bedroom, close the door quietly, take more than my fair share of melatonin, and drift off to sleep. Upon awakening, I would most certainly find my son gently nestled against my shoulder. Thinking it to be the natural result of losing his mother, I hadn't thought much of it. That was until the nightmares started and the children began their nightly visit. The first night I saw them, I was sure it had been a dream. The bed was nearly pressed up against the window, and my son was directly below it. The two children reached their arms through the opening and were only inches away from grabbing my son. Somehow, holding back a scream, I reached out to push the cold arms away. And then I shut the window and locked it with a loud click. "Dad," Ben had said, having perhaps awoken from his own nightmare. Before he could see the two children, I quickly closed the curtains and pressed my back up against the window. "What are you doing, Dad?" he continued. "Nothing. Go back to bed," I said quietly, having no idea what to say or do. This is what I did do. Each night, I would lock the windows securely and shut the blinds so tightly that it was impossible to see anything. I made it a rule in our house that each night, every window must be locked securely and the blinds shut. I think I made up some excuse about burglars choosing houses where they could see inside. A few nights later, I peeked through the blinds and saw the two children, pale as death, back to where they had been that first night. I became lost in the depth of their eyes, and I watched as they looked from me to my son. "No, you can't have him," I whispered angrily, snapping back into reality and pushing the blinds closed. As time continued, Ben's nightmares increased. "Dad, sometimes at night I see things," Ben said, fear washing over his face. I interrupted quickly. "I know what you see, Ben, and don't worry, they can't get you." He began to cry as he looked up at me. "You promise?" Tears flowed down my cheeks, then as well as I hugged him close. "I promise." Embracing him tightly, I looked over his shoulder and towards the tightly shut window. I couldn't see the dead children, but I still knew they were out there. Perhaps there were even more than the night before. Months went by, and Ben eventually got the point where he wanted to try sleeping in his own room again. "I don't want to be afraid anymore, Dad." He paused and looked up at me. "They can't get me, right?" I was lost for words, trying to hide the fact that I was indeed thinking it over. I had not only boarded off my son's bedroom window, but had sealed it as well. Nothing could get through, I was sure of it. And it wasn't right to have my son always living in fear. "Okay, Ben." Shortly after, I set up a live camera in the corner of his room, facing his bed and where the window had been. I wanted my son to find courage and face his fears, but I didn't want to take any chances either. I tested the camera feed carefully and then went to tuck him in. Kissing him on the forehead, my son hugged me close. "Don't worry, Dad. I'm not afraid anymore," he said. I was beyond proud of my son. Not only had he lost his mother, he had been given real monsters to contend with, and he had shown courage and determination in the face of it all. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. That night, I didn't sleep at all, only watching the camera feed to my son's room. I had placed the lens facing his bed and the closed-off window, just in case. Nothing happened for hours until I did something so simple, something I would regret for the rest of my life. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. I was gone no more than 20 seconds when I heard him. "Dad!" Ben screamed, making me drop the glass. I watched as it shattered onto the kitchen floor. "Ben!" I screamed, rushing to his bedroom. "Ben, hang on!" I shouted again, now just outside his room. When I burst through the door, I felt my heart stop. My son's bed was empty, and he was gone. "Ben? Ben!" I screamed, searching frantically for him. The window was still boarded off and sealed, yet my son was gone nonetheless. The police never found him, and I could tell from how the detective in charge eyed me over that I was their main suspect. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I found Ben's drawings from the previous months. There were no dead children outside the window, and no monsters with black eyes. There was something else entirely. Please, if you ever see the black-eyed children outside your window, please, God, don't make the same mistake that I did. They aren't monsters. I think they were trying to warn us. As I sit today and stare out the window, I tell myself that maybe, just maybe, I'll find my son again one day. I have to think that. It's the only thing that keeps me alive. I glance down at my son's notebook from months earlier. One page stands out among the rest. There's a drawing of his room, the window boarded off, and my son sleeping peacefully. The closet door is cracked open, and a large clawed hand can be seen reaching through towards his bed. 10th story. I know where black-eyed children come from. Also, there are quite a few good stories about them. But think about it before you listen to mine. They say black-eyed kids only come if you know about them. When I was a kid, my little brother and I visited my grandparents in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, every summer. It was a pretty boring town. As the capital of the Cherokee Nation, most recreational activities were related to the culture and history of the Cherokees. The last summer we spent there, I was 11, that age between wanting so badly to be seen as a teenager, but still finding enjoyment in Bratz dolls. My brother was 8 and wouldn't settle down unless he had his Nintendo DS. I didn't dread visiting my grandparents, like many children do, other than the cultural shock that came from leaving our home in LA to the relatively small Oklahoma town. I loved spending time with my grandparents, and so did my brother. They spoiled us with toys and ice cream. On a Thursday afternoon, my little brother and I were playing at the elementary school across the street from my grandparents' house. If you've ever been to Oklahoma, you probably know how quickly the weather can change. It's not uncommon for it to snow one day and be in the 70s the next day. This day went from sunny to cloudy extremely quick. It didn't begin raining or lightning, so my brother and I continued to play, but these weren't normal clouds. They looked heavier and thicker. They were almost black. I'm still not sure if the clouds were some sort warning for what was about to happen, or I'm just trying to connect things. A girl who was probably 9 or 10 showed up at some point. She didn't have parents with her, but it was a fairly safe town and not uncommon for kids to walk around. She introduced herself as Ally. She was blonde and blue-eyed, but began enlightening us with old Cherokee ghost tales. With Tahlequah being the capital of the Cherokee Nation, many urban legends in other towns are actually true in Tahlequah. Most people's great-great-grandmas really were Cherokees, and the school playground we were currently playing on really had once been an Indian burial ground. She told us one particular grotesque story about the Deer Lady, who was a here-broken woman that went insane and cut her legs off and stitched a deer's legs on her torso in place. Her final story inspired what we thought would be a fun adventure. She told us a chief's 15-year-old daughter had been brutally murdered by her white husband on their anniversary for flirting with another man. They buried her and, out of respect, never removed her gravestone when the school was built. Ally told us it would take a bit of maneuvering, but there was a panel that could be removed and we could crawl underneath the school and see the gravestone. We were all in shape, so we began our adventure. To our disappointment, the panel had been screwed shut and it began to rain. My brother and I decided to go home. Ally, however, insisted that there had to be another way in. I tried to tell her that her parents would probably be worried and that it would be best for her to go home too, but she was determined to find a way in. My brother and I went in my grandparents' house and changed into some dry clothes, drank Kool-Aid, and watched TV. While my brother and grandparents were watching The Fairly Odd Parents, I noticed I could still see Ally, drenched in rain, trying to find a way underneath the school from the living room window. Eventually, she did. I watched her crawl in, but I never saw her crawl out. We sat through an entire episode of The Fairly Odd Parents and half an episode Drake and Josh, so it had to have been 45 minutes. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I told myself she had to have come out a different way, or maybe she came out when I wasn't looking and finally drifted off. The next morning, I woke up refreshed. I was certain Ally had found a way out. My grandparents took us to the carnival and to Brahms, the local ice cream shop. It was 6 o'clock in the evening when we got home, and my grandma began cooking supper while my grandpa took a nap. My brother and I were kids, though, and still had lots of energy left. So we went across the street to play some more, and our grandma told she would call us when supper was ready. I told my little brother that I had seen Ally go underneath the school and asked him if he was up for an adventure. He agreed, and I went to the panel that I saw Ally loosen. I loosened and crawled underneath the school, and my brother followed. The reaming daylight flooded into the basement along with us, providing us with just enough light to see things directly in front of us. The ground was cold, wet dirt, and there were many pipes and old basketballs to crawl around. I immediately spotted 8 to 10 headstones, though. The first one was directly to the right of my brother and I, but the name was too faded to read. I was feeling kind of creeped out that Ally had been right, and we were crawling over a bunch of dead bodies. I probably would have left, but my brother didn't seem afraid at all, and I wanted to seem braver than him. So I crawled to the next stone. This one read Andrew Cummings, and had a birth date of 1890 and death date of 1902. There was one to the left of it that read Allison Cummings, and had a birth date of 1893 and death date of 1902 also. This freaked me out even more, and made me think of Ally, who had the same name and looked about the same age as the dead girl several feet below me. My brother suddenly shouted, "Look, something in the corner just moved." Before I could tell him that we should leave immediately, he shoved me out of the way, began crawling incredibly fast to the corner furthest from us. I could clearly see a couple of large figures moving, but couldn't make out much else. "They're probably just dogs. Let's go," I told him. But as he crawled, I crawled right behind him, getting closer and closer to the larger figures that began to look more and more like silhouettes of 3 people sitting against a wall, all with their knees to their chest. When they came in a clear view, my brother turned around and crawled underneath me. I held him close to my chest. We were bother terrified. The first girl was clearly Ally, except she didn't look as lively as she had looked yesterday. She wasn't smiling, and her hair was stringy. Next to her was a boy, who looked close in age to me and had no hair at all. He wasn't smiling either. And there was a girl who looked more normal than Ally, or the boy. Her skin was dark, and her hair was so long it bunched up at the ground. She looked like she was about 16, but her facial expression was the scariest. It was one of absolute despair. The scariest part about all of them, those, was their eyes. I could see my brother's eyes glowing, but none of their eyes glowed. It didn't even really look like they had eyes, just pits of darkness. Ally smiled and said, "Thank God, you guys came." The other 2 laughed. "Yo, we're going to be leaving now," I said, trying my hardest to sound casual and not scared. All 3 laughed, and the other girl spoke up, "No, you're not." Her voice had a confidence that mine didn't. I pushed my brother in the direction we came in, and he began quickly crawling away. I heard my grandma calling out to us and called out to her to help us. All 3 of them suddenly stopped laughing. Ally suddenly looked scared. She said, "Leave right now and never tell a soul. You saw us." You got lucky. We didn't have to be told twice, and quickly crawled out. At dinner that night, my brother and I chalked up our silence to it having been a long day and us being tired. We never played at the playground across the street again, and rarely talked about the incident. 5 months after we left, my grandparents were murdered in their own home. A neighbor had said she had seen my grandma let 3 children into their home the day of their murder. A bald boy, a blonde girl, and a dark-haired girl. Cops were never able to find any leads, and the case was eventually closed. Neither my brother nor I planned to visit Tahlequah or even Oklahoma ever again, but I know that it doesn't matter. I'm certain that one day they'll show up on my step too. I know I'll tell them to go away, and I can only hope that will be enough. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.